maidens, but ladies line up at his feet literally begging for his vanilla milkshake. And to be them massaged by his magical staff, I'm not going to tell you why, you're just going to find out. Story time. There was once a war between humans and monsters, probably because humans felt inferior to these monsters, or they wanted full power over them. The war ended when everyone got tired. His first patient is a cowgirl, and wow, she is stacked like a tower of watermelons. This blunt goat gets right to work, checking those watermelons like they hold the secrets of the universe. This checkup is sending her straight into bliss. He pokes, prods, and then checks her ears. Turns out she's with child. Her husband, a full-blown bull with horns, was happy he's about to be a daddy. Glenn's assistant, Sapphee, slithers in holding flowers to congratulate the happy couple. But there's a problem. She is in a mood, and it's not the good kind. She hates that Glenn was alone in a room with another woman, especially when he has to lay hands on them all in the name of a medical examination. She also wants him to call her by a cute nickname from their school days, but that's not happening. A letter arrives from Dr. Dully, summoning Glenn and Sapphee for a checkup session. They head to the arena the next day, where they're greeted by Thessalia, a centaur princess and a fighter. She struts in, all royal and confident. The risless farm animal in a human body gets to work straight up, and this time his first patient is a catgirl who wants to pounce on him so badly that she jumps on him immediately. But Sapphee is having none of it. With one quick tail whip, the catgirl is off Glenn and sent flying. Then Thessalia steps up for her checkup. She starts undressing, talking about how she doesn't want a rigid man, but someone as soft and gentle as Glenn. This fool is too dense to realize she's flirting. Sapphee, once again, is not having it. She jumps into the conversation before this horse girl can seduce the world's dumbest doctor. Later that night, Glenn is tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Thessalia's attendants, Kay and Lorna, had spilt some concerning tea. These two centaur ladies are loaded with watermelons so majestic, I won't mind having one of them. They are worried because Thessalia has been losing fights lately, even though she trains hard and has talent. Glenn, with his two remaining brain cells, starts thinking about possible reasons. Sapphee shows up and offers to bring him alcohol to help him relax. When she returns, she hands him a single glass while she herself chugs a jug, like she's the drunken kung fu master. This snake lady is built differently. Tipsy and feeling bold, she wraps Glenn up in her tail. It looks like she's about to drain the humanity out of him, but instead, she just threatens him. Apparently, Dr. Cthulhu would never forgive her if she loved this goat into oblivion. The next day, Thessalia loses another fight. That night, while she's training, she gets ambushed. Not by an enemy, but by Glenn and some helpers who tie her down for a hoof treatment. She resists, but there is no escape. Once again, Glenn the vet gets to work, filing and fixing her hooves while she cries out loud. Sapphee sees what's happening and isn't about to let Thessalia moan her way into Glenn's pants. Without hesitation, she wraps her tail around the horse girl and shoves the tail end into her mouth. The next day, Thessalia enters her match and wins effortlessly. She cheers like a kid who just got a lifetime supply of candy. Turns out, all she needed was some proper hoof care. Who knew a horse girl needed functioning feet to fight? Sapphee remembers the time she was dragged to Glenn's house like an unwanted package during the war between monsters and humans. Once the war ended, she was sent home. As she left in a carriage, Glenn turned into a weeping mess, bawling like a baby who dropped his ice cream. Back in the present, Sapphee realizes they have run out of purified water, but before she can do anything about it, a knock interrupts her. She opens the door, and there stands Glenn asking about her sunblock ointment. Later, the two sit in a boat, floating down the waterways. Glenn starts blabbering about the importance of sunblock, making Sapphee thank him. Meanwhile, Sapphee is just excited to be outside with him. The person paddling their boat ditches them, and Glenn reminds Sapphee that they are here for purified water, not a shopping spree. Suddenly, a goofy-looking merman pops out of the water and greets them. Sapphee, being Sapphee, immediately gets excited and tells the merman to take them to the gift shop. Glenn, as a fun sponge that he is, immediately shuts that down and tells the merman to take them to the purified water shop instead. After finally getting the water, Sapphee once again tries to head to the gift shop. Glenn looks at her like she just suggested setting their money on fire and tells her they'll waste cash. At the gift shop, Sapphee gets excited over a single glass, but then she says the best gift is following Glenn on his journey. This makes Glenn blush because even he can't believe she actually thinks he's worth following. A little mermaid suddenly calls them, making Sapphee practically explode with excitement. She insists they stop and listen. The little mermaid, Lula, introduces herself and says she sings for 3 coopers. As Sapphee and Lula chat, Glenn completely zones out. This absolute genius is too busy thinking about nothing until Sapphee wakes him up by licking his face. Lula convinces them that listening to her song will make their relationship lovely. Sapphee tries to pay, but Glenn says he'll handle it. Lula starts singing beautifully until she starts coughing like a grandpa without his inhaler. She tries to continue for free, but Glenn, suddenly remembering he's supposed to be a doctor, says they need to find out what's wrong. He asks the weird-looking merman to take them somewhere quiet for an examination. Lula, broke as a joke, says she can't afford an exam. Glenn assures her it's free. He checks her mouth, finds some inflammation, and then he asks her to open her chest. Lula, rightfully horrified, refuses. Sapphee quickly steps in before Glenn can make things even worse and helps him rephrase. Glenn then checks Lula's gills and, like a professional, sticks his wet fingers inside. Lula makes some weirdly happy noises, making Glenn freeze like a deer in headlights. Finally, he pulls his hand out and finds something sticky. Before Glenn can explain what's wrong, chaos erupts as a boy falls into the river. His mom screams for help. Lula immediately jumps in and saves him, proving she's already a better hero than Glenn will ever be. But while everyone fusses over the boy, Lula suddenly goes limp and slides back into the water. Glenn finally remembers that Lula can't switch between her lungs and gills. He takes a deep breath and dives in, scaring Sapphee half to death. She yells at the merman to take her closer. Meanwhile, Glenn catches up to Lula underwater. He kisses her to give her air. Lula starts breathing, but Glenn immediately starts drowning. Just as Lula is about to panic, Sapphine's tail appears in the water. She grabs both of them and hauls them back. When she sees Glenn clinging to Lula, she instantly yanks them apart and scolds him for being reckless. She also tells him to consider her feelings before doing anything stupid. Later, Glenn and Sapphee watch Lula perform at the mermaid concert. Afterward, she swims over and they ask about her health. She gets shy remembering Glenn's terrible attempt at being useful. Sapphee scolds Glenn again, and he actually apologizes. Lula thanks him instead. Glenn smiles at her. This makes Lula so embarrassed that she swims away. Sapphee, still completely done with Glenn, tells him she wants them to get along because she considers Lula her little sister. Back at their clinic, Glenn and Sapphee treat a slime lady and talk about how they will help her keep her shape. She leaves while being carried out in a bathtub. Meanwhile, Glenn and Sapphee finally get a break, so Sapphee removes the sign that says they're available for treatment. Just when they think they'll have some peace, a knock on the door ruins everything. When they open it, they are shocked to see the council representative of Lindworm City, Lady Scotty Dragonfell, off bandits who thought they could mess with her. But instead of running, those idiots, Glenn asks what Scotty wants. She replies, but he hears absolutely nothing. Before his brain cell can process what's happening, another woman barges in and translates. Turns out, she's Kunai, Scotty's bodyguard, and she's here to yell at them for not listening properly. Sapphee whispers to Glenn that Kunai is crazy devoted to her master, but before she can finish, Kunai shuts her up. She then explains that she lost her arm fighting Asti the fight, and now she needs Glenn to find her missing arm and fix her up. Glenn asks why they came to him. Kunai says, Doctor, Cthulhu referred them, which should have been Glenn's first red flag. He then asks what kind of monster she is, but before Kunai can answer, Scotty explains that Kunai was originally human, but got stitched together using parts from dead people. Before leaving, Scotty orders Glenn to treat Kunai, but Kunai instantly refuses, saying she can find her own arm and reattach it herself. She dips, leaving Glenn standing there like a fool. Sapphee and Glenn start talking about how aggressive Kunai is, but Glenn, with all the confidence of someone who has never been useful, claims that the doctor who experimented on her just had bad technique. Then he decides to go looking for Kunai's missing arm, leaving Sapphee and the fairies in charge of the clinic. Meanwhile, Kunai spots one of the bandits who attacked her and chases him into an alley. But before she realizes what's happening, someone ambushes her, and she ends up on the ground. Back in the city, Glenn starts looking for Kunai's arm, but then realizes he never asked where she even fought the bandits. Suddenly he hears a scream and finds Tilia, who was just shopping for vegetables when she Kunai's leg. Glenn picks it up and assures her that this is not a crime scene. Meanwhile, Kunai, now dragging herself across the ground, realizing both her arm and leg like a complete amateur. She suddenly feels a weird sensation. Her thigh is shaking. Turns out Glenn is holding her leg like a total creep. Tilia watches him work and says she's falling for him, but then she immediately adds that he looks like a perv with the way he's fondling the zombie leg. Glenn realizes he's been caught being weird. and begs her not to tell Sapphee, or he's doomed. Kunai, still on the ground, figures out that Glenn is the one touching her leg, and she starts wondering when her curse will finally give her a break, because she can hear the voices of all the dead people who make up her body. While Glenn holds Kunai's leg, Lula appears and tells him there's a rumor going around that he's collecting body parts for some creepy experiment. Glenn, looking guilty as hell, quickly explains that he's just trying to help his patient. Lula says she knows that, and then casually pulls out Kunai's missing arm. Glenn is shocked, thanks her, and cleans the arm without realizing Kunai can feel everything he's doing. He tells Lula he needs to find Kunai next, and she tells him to just ask her arm and leg where she went. That evening, Glenn finally finds Kunai and starts stitching her back together while talking to her. Kunai starts calming down. After fixing her arm, Glenn moves onto her leg, making her make some very interesting noises. Meanwhile, Sapphee gets a visitor, her drinking buddy. Before leaving, the visitor gives Sapphee a gift and casually drops a bomb, saying she's worried Glenn might be out there cheating. Sapphee, absolutely not in the mood, kicks the big spider lady out and starts overthinking. Back at the clinic, Glenn finishes treating Kunai, who is now deeply embarrassed. She thanks him and leaves in a hurry. Glenn, meanwhile, returns home, feeds the fairies, and sees Sapphee. But then he notices something shocking. Her stomach is swollen. Sapphee, completely unbothered, tells him she's now pregnant. Seeing that she loves no one else, she must have drugged him, loved him, and made him a baby daddy. Just as Glenn's frail little heart is about to explode out of his weak ribcage, he moves closer, only for her to reveal it's just a prank. She has an egg someone found and brought over. Before anyone can process what's happening, the bandits, thinking they're in some Attack on Titan side quest, storm the clinic like brainless titans. Sapphee, now in full protective waifu mode, wipes the floor with one of them without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, Glenn, the useless sack of bones that he is, realizes this night isn't ending without some over-the-top shonen fight scenes. Sapphee quickly figures out that the bandits think they're working with Kunai. Speaking of Kunai, she's already taken down one of these bottom-tier villains and explains the situation. Turns out these bandits are involved in a harpy egg and animal trafficking ring. Glenn realizes the egg they have belongs to a harpy, and the bandits want it back. Just when things couldn't get dumber, Lady Scotty shows up in a boat pulled by Lula, who has apparently been downgraded from pop idol to full-time water taxi. Glenn immediately accuses Scotty of exploiting Lula's poverty. Scotty shuts him down instantly, reminding him that he's about as relevant as filler episodes. Lula defends Scotty, saying she's doing this by choice. With everyone gathered, they charge toward the bandit hideout, fully expecting this to turn into a One Piece style arc finale. The patrol team kicks down the front doors like they're storming the Grand Line, ready to rescue the kidnapped Harpy girls. Lady Scotty apologizes for dragging them into this mess, but before the emotional moment can settle, the bandits ambush them with arrows. Fortunately, our heroes dodge like they've been secretly training in the Survey Corps. Kunai tanks a few arrows like they're minor inconveniences. Meanwhile, Tissalia and her team of overpowered centaurs enter the battlefield, trampling bandits like they're bugs. They tell Glenn and his useless self to keep moving toward the hostages. One of the dumbest bandit rants about how humans and monsters can never live together, but Tissalia, not in the mood for his nonsense, knocks some sense into him with a well-placed kick. As their boat arrives at the hideout, Kunai orders Lula to get to safety. Right when things start looking good, the bandit leader appears, looking like a rejected sword art online villain. He and Kunai exchange insults, with him justifying his messed up trafficking business as necessary for survival. Kunai, unimpressed, calls him an ugly bottom-feeding dog and challenges him to a duel. The fight isn't over yet. The bandits try to rally, but Sapphee, Tissalia, and Scotty form an OP trio and crush them instantly. Unfortunately, Sapphee gets poisoned and passes out. As she's fading, she starts mumbling some deep confession, only for Glenn to reveal he already knew. This somehow turns into Sapphee getting weirdly intimate, because apparently it's mating season and she's picked the weakest male in the entire world. She pulls Glenn onto the bed and locks hands with him like she's about to introduce him to a whole new world. Look at those watermelons, round and perfectly placed, ready to suffocate this poor fool. Just when things are about to get spicy, the poison kicks in at the worst possible moment, saving Glenn from losing his virgin status.